Hey guys, tonight we begin in the softest possible way with a flickering candle, the hiss of a cold iron brazier, and a pair of bare feet hitting a stone floor that feels like it was personally forged by the concept of suffering. You are for better or worse awake, and you are a medieval nun. You live in a convent nestled just outside a sleepy village, a few miles from a monastery, with louder bells and more dramatic chanting. The rooster outside is confused by moonlight and insists on crowing well before dawn. You're not sure if this counts as divine mischief or just poor poultry design. Either way, your day begins now. The room is small, neat, and smells faintly of beeswax and old parchment. A wooden crucifix watches silently from the far wall, and your blanket, hand-stitched and slightly uneven, is already cooling where you kicked it off 5 minutes ago. Somewhere nearby, Sister Beatrix is already rustling through her morning robes with the speed of someone who has never once hit snooze on anything in her life. You get up. You stretch. You regret stretching. Your spine crackles like firewood, your shoulders whimper, and your ankles would like to have a word with the rule of St. Benedict. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where and when the bedtime army gathers. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell rings soft and low, like the abbess's disapproval. You grab your habit tie, your girdle, and shuffle quietly through the corridor toward the chapel. The hallways are lit only by oil lamps, their reflections bending in warped glass like sleepy ghosts. Your slippers make soft whispering sounds on the flagstones, and you try not to trip over the cat who lives in the rafters and only comes down when someone spills soup. Entering the chapel, you bow across yourself and join the line of yawning silhouettes already kneeling in prayer. It's chilly enough that someone has snuck in with a wool wrap beneath her veil. Probably Sister Adela. Always ahead of the curve, that one. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval nuns followed a rigorous schedule known as the Divine Office, which involved multiple prayer sessions, some as early as 2:30 a.m, interspersed throughout the day and night. No sleep-ins, no, I'll catch up on matins later, and certainly no coffee, at least not yet. You recite psalms. Latin phrases spill from your lips like worn beads from a rosary, well memorized, half meaningful, occasionally mumbled with the cadence of someone hoping God appreciates effort over pronunciation. Sister Agnes, 2 spots to your left, is probably judging you again. She has immaculate Latin and the spiritual flexibility of a granite slab. After the prayers, the group disperses. Some head to the kitchen, others begin morning chores. You take a moment to rub warmth back into your arms, inhaling the faint scent of incense and cold stone. It's not glamorous, but there's peace in the pattern, in the quiet repetition. Now for the quirky bit one. 14th century convent had a rooster so unreliable that the nuns replaced him with a hand drum system. One sister was designated to gently beat a drum outside each cell when it was time to rise. That lasted 2 weeks until someone beat the drum too enthusiastically and startled the abbess into a candle holder. The rooster was reinstated. Historians still argue whether the extreme early rising rituals truly enhanced spiritual devotion or simply created generations of nuns with mild sleep deprivation-induced visions. Some believe the strict scheduling was a method of control, others insist it shaped deep spiritual focus. When your day begins in cold silence, you learn to listen differently. Your stomach growls, not aggressively, just helpfully, as if reminding you that while the soul may be patient, the belly is not. Breakfast is next. It's not grand. It's not supposed to be. But it's the first real warmth of the day, both literal and social. You're already picturing the bench by the hearth, the soft steam of barley broth, and perhaps, if fate is kind, a slightly less stale piece of rye bread. You'll need the energy. The day ahead holds many trials, scrubbing scripture, some suspicious goat behaviour, and maybe, just maybe, a moment alone in the cheese cellar. Because while you live by vows of obedience, chastity, and poverty, your heart quietly belongs to cheese. The making of it, the perfecting of it, the quietly heretical possibility of using just a touch of foreign spice. But first breakfast, first the broth, then the dreams. You shuffle into the refectory with the others trailing behind Sister Marguerite, who walks like she's on a mission from God, and God is located directly next to the soup pot. The room is dim warmed by a small fire beneath an iron cauldron that smells like barley onions and resignation. This is breakfast. Long benches flank narrow tables. You take your seat near the end, as always. You're not a senior sister, not a novice, just comfortably in the middle, where the expectations are lower and the scrutiny less intense. This is your zone. The seat next to you is empty, briefly, until Sister Edith slides in, exhaling loudly, like she's already survived half the day. I dreamed of figs, she whispers, actual figs, and a plate with more than one. You nod solemnly. Figs are rare here. Not forbidden, just exotic, rumoured. The kind of food you imagine only abbots and saints ever taste. Maybe someone once saw a fig in a manuscript, delicately inked in gold leaf, beside the martyrdom of Saint somebody. Probably juicy. Breakfast is eaten mostly in silence, save for the occasional spoon clink and communal throat clearing. You blow gently on your bowl, inhale the scent and spoon in the first bite. It's hot. Too hot. You try not to make a noise, but your eyes water. Across the table, Sister Blanche grins slightly without looking up. She knows. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Meals in medieval convents were governed by strict rules. Talking during meals was generally discouraged or outright banned. Instead, a designated sister would read aloud from religious texts, usually from the pulpit sometimes while everyone else ate, sometimes before. It was part meal, part sermon, part ancient audiobook. Today's reader is Sister Claire, whose voice has all the passion of wet parchment. She reads from a commentary on the Psalms, a slow and winding passage about shepherds and moral steadfastness. You try to pay attention, you really do, but your mind begins to wander gently, respectfully, toward more pressing matters. Like how many chores are left on your rotation before you get back to the cheese cellar. You're not obsessed. That would be unbecoming. You're simply focused. If a knight can spend his life training for a single duel, you can spend your mornings navigating toward curds and rennet. Now for the quirky bit. Some medieval convents had a designated cheese mistress, an actual title for the sister responsible for all dairy-related duties. She managed the milk, the fermenting, the pressing, and the delicate art of aging cheeses in cool dark cellars. In certain regions she wielded nearly as much influence as the cellarer, especially when trade was involved. Because while vows forbade luxuries, cheese could be persuasive. Historians still argue whether convent food practices were austere necessities or hidden luxuries. Were these strict diets genuinely about discipline, or just shaped by what the garden happened to offer that season? Some records show meals that seem bland and bare. Others suggest subtle indulgences cloaked in pious language, steamed carrot pudding for the soul, as it were. You scrape your bowl, dip your last hunk of bread into the broth, and chew thoughtfully. Not bad today, saltier than usual, a small blessing. Or perhaps someone knocked over the barrel again and didn't confess. The meal ends with a short prayer, and then a scraping of benches as sisters rise and disperse toward their appointed tasks. The abbess walks past, nodding gently at each of you, her expression unreadable, and her veil perpetually perfect. You bow. She nods again. It's the whole conversation. You head toward the cloister walk, the long stone corridor that loops the convent's central courtyard. It's lined with herbs and gravel, its colonnades echoing with the soft thud of sandals, and the occasional sneeze from someone allergic to lavender, but too pious to complain. Your assigned task this morning is laundry duty, not thrilling, but necessary. You grab your tub, a bar of lye soap wrapped in cloth, and head to the washing yard, where basins wait under the open sky. Already, a few sisters are there, sleeves rolled, scrubbing with focused intensity, Sister Agnes is humming a hymn. Sister Cecilia is muttering about socks again. No one knows why she owns so many. Some suspect she knits them in secret, in direct defiance of the abbess's minimalist guidelines. You find your rhythm quickly, soak, scrub, ring, repeat. The soap stings your hands, which are still raw from yesterday's nettle weeding session. But there's something pleasant in the rhythm, in the slap of wet cloth against the stone, in the knowledge that you're helping maintain the sacred and the sanitary. And besides, once the linens are hung and the basins rinsed, you're free for an hour. Free. Which means one glorious thing: you can slip into the back corridor, past the storeroom, and into the cheese cellar. You hum now just slightly, a tune with no name, just enough to keep your pace steady as the morning sun brightens the cloister windows. The air smells of rosemary and soap and wool. Somewhere a bell rings for mid-morning prayer. But not for you, not yet. The curds are calling. You dry your hands hastily on the edge of your habit and pretend you're walking with reverent purpose, not the giddy anticipation of someone about to sneak a look at a half-formed wheel of cheese. The hallway beyond the laundry yard is quiet, just you, the musty scent of old rushes, and the faintest creak of beams above. Down a narrow flight of steps, careful not to slip. Your sandals have all the grip of a boiled turnip. You descend into the heart of the convent's underworld. The cheese cellar. Cool, dim, reverent. This is your sanctuary. It's not large, perhaps the size of a generous cloakroom, but the air down here is thick with humidity and the perfume of patient fermentation. Wooden shelves line the walls, each one cradling rounds of cheese in various states of becoming. Some are soft and still damp, others furred with delicate white mould, and a few wearing wax coats like smug little bishops. You nod to them all. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, cheese-making was a monastic art. Monks and nuns alike developed regional styles that are still around today. Convents especially favoured soft cheeses that could be made quickly and stored easily, ideal for both sustenance and trade. And yes, many were seasoned with herbs grown right outside in the cloister garden. You step softly over to your favourite shelf, third from the bottom back corner, next to the wall, where the draft keeps things just slightly cooler. There it is, your wheel, the one you helped start 2 weeks ago. Still nameless, but firming up nicely. You resist the urge to touch it, mostly. You check the cloth wrapping, slightly moist. That's good. You lift the wheel carefully, give it a gentle press with your fingers. It resists, even better. Sister Norberta once said, a good cheese should feel like the side of your own thigh. You don't know how to feel about that, but she's 70 and terrifying, so you smile and nod. You rewrap the wheel, set it down, and step back like you've just blessed it. In some ways you have. A clink from the shelf startles you. You turn. A small jar of juniper berries has rolled out from a crate of flavouring ingredients. You tuck it back gently. Maybe later you'll try something bold: juniper garlic, maybe rosemary pressed into the rind. Maybe, if Sister Teresa isn't looking. Now for the quirky bits. Some nuns in 12th century France invented a cheese infused with crushed violets. Not for flavour, though it was oddly fragrant, but because they believed it pleased St. Gertrude, patron of gardeners, and the occasional dairy enthusiast. There's one surviving recipe in a water-stained manuscript that includes a line about blessing each mould with a kiss. No one knows if that part was literal or metaphor. Historians still argue whether convents were sites of culinary innovation or simply keepers of survival cuisine. Was the nun who added nettle to her whey a genius or just out of options? Some say these kitchens were the test labs of rural Europe. Others suggest the recipes were mostly rote, passed down, without much flair, until someone dropped a fig in the pot and called it divine. You sit for a moment on the low stool near the press. The cheese press is old iron-bound wood, with a weighted crank that squeaks like it has secrets. There's a half-full cloth bundle beneath the lever now, whey seeping into the basin below. You reach out and tighten the press just a touch, the cloth size. Nearby, a pot of rennet cow stomach lovingly curdled rests beneath a waxed cloth. Not the most charming detail, but essential. Cheese is not made with magic. It is made with time enzymes and just a touch of questionable alchemy. The cellar is still. No footsteps above. No distant choir rehearsal. Just the tiny pops and creaks of settling wood and the low gurgle of whey draining. You hum a little tune under your breath, a melody you half remember from childhood. Maybe your mother sang it while churning butter. Maybe you invented it to pass the time during morning prayers. It doesn't matter. It fits here, among the shelves and shadows and hopeful wheels. You stand stretch and take one last look. The wheels stare back, stoic, smug, glorious. Back upstairs, the kitchen bell rings. Midday meal prep. You sigh and head up the steps, blinking as the sunlight stabs you square in the cornea. Everything up here is too bright, too dry, too filled with movement. Someone's yelling about carrots. Someone else is arguing over how much salt is too much when seasoning cabbage. You sneak into the kitchen via the side door and begin assembling your station. Slicing radishes, chopping chives, stirring the millet porridge with a spoon large enough to row a boat. The cook, Sister Joanna, eyes you suspiciously. Where were you just now? You blink. Inspecting cloth storage, you say instantly, regretting it. She narrows her eyes. She's no fool. But she also knows that someone who cares deeply about pickling onions and dusting bread crusts with sage probably isn't skipping chores for sin. Probably. You dice celery with a little too much enthusiasm. Here's a moment of reflection. The cheese doesn't feed just you. It feeds everyone here. Every slice, every curd, every rind-cut wedge contributes to the life of this place. You're not a cheesemaker. You're a caretaker of a process, a guardian of flavour and faith. Which is why you're careful with every measurement, every stir, every step, even if no one sees. You wipe your hands on your apron, rough woven linen still smelling faintly of last week's lentils, and step back from the kitchen bench. The millet porridge bubbles gently in the corner cauldron. A fresh loaf cools on the sill, and Sister Joanna has miraculously left the room to investigate a report of suspiciously creative garnishing in the herb garden. This means freedom. Not total freedom, mind you, but enough to take an extra moment with the radish roses, or to sprinkle just a bit more thyme into the soup. It's the little rebellions that keep the cloister from fraying. The noon bell hasn't rung yet, but it's close. You can feel it in your spine, that strange sixth sense convent life hammers into you the ability to detect impending bells through sheer repetition. You turn to prep the meal trays. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Monastic meals in medieval Europe were highly structured, often simple, and surprisingly vegetarian. Meat was reserved for rare occasions, or infirmary diets. Bread broth, legumes, and cheese made up the bulk of daily fare. Some orders were stricter than others, and many kept the rule of silence during meals, meaning conversation was replaced by the quiet clatter of bowls and the occasional passive-aggressive glance over the lentils. You ladle broth into bowls with practiced rhythm, one for the abbess, one for the guest tray, one for Sister Agnes, who claims mushrooms give her visions, but only ever when it's her turn to help with firewood. Today's main dish, cabbage stew with garlic turnip mash, and if Sister Joanna doesn't catch you, just a whisper of caraway. You learned that trick from a passing friar who said caraway kept the devil out of digestion. He also claimed onions whispered secrets, so you took his advice with a spoonful of salt. You set the wooden spoons beside the bowls and fold the cloth napkins with origami-like precision. There's no reward for it, but someone once told you that care folds backward into the soul. Maybe it was the friar. Maybe it was Sister Norberta before she fell asleep in the rhubarb bed last summer. The refectory door creaks open. Time to carry the trays. You balance two on your arm, another in hand, and one pressed awkwardly to your chest. A dance of logistics. You step carefully, your sandals skimming the flagstones with a grace that would have shocked your younger, clumsier self. The refectory is already half full. Nuns file in by age and assignment, their habits rustling like wind through parchment. You catch eyes with Sister Maria and exchange a nod. She handles the reading today, always a gamble. You distribute the trays. The abbess murmurs her thanks, eyes scanning the table like a general inspecting rations. You drop off the guest tray at the far end where a visiting deacon is sitting quietly, trying not to look terrified by the beats. Sister Maria stands and begins to read, voice calm and lilting. Today's selection, a life of Saint Gertrude, who once calmed a thunderstorm by waving a spoon and singing off-key, allegedly. Now for the quirky bit. Some convents maintained culinary novitiates, young women assigned to the kitchens for 6 months of intensive food preparation training. These programs were partly practical and partly spiritual, with teachings that linked bread rising to humility, soup stirring to inner peace, and famously burned crusts to the fiery trials of the saints. A few manuals survive with advice like, "Be wary of peas that float, for they know things." Historians still argue whether these kitchen traditions functioned more as sacred metaphors, or just a really persuasive way to get chores done without complaining. Was dinner a devotion, or just a disciplined dinner? You finish serving and slip into your own place at the end of the table. The soup is warm, the bread crisp, and the silence, while technically required, feels companionable. You listen to the clink of spoons, the rustle of robes, the occasional sneeze from Sister Katharina, who always forgets she's allergic to dill. You sip, you chew, you breathe. And when the meal ends, you gather the dishes without complaint, your arms cradling bowls and napkins, and just enough residual warmth to carry you back to the kitchen without noticing the draft in the hallway. The dishes are scrubbed in quiet rhythm. Water sloshes, brushes scrape, and soap bubbles reflect tiny stained glass windows in their fleeting lives. Someone hums a chant off-key, someone else mutters about weevils. Life goes on. Once the final ladle is hung, you hang your apron splash water on your face and head for the cloister garden. It's your hour of free time if you can call pulling weeds and collecting lavender free. The sun hits you as you step into the garden. It's autumn now, the air crisp but the light still golden. The herbs wave politely in the breeze. You nod to the rosemary bough, slightly to the sage, and dig your hands into the soil beside the mint patch. A bee ignores you. A squirrel eyes your basket like it owes him rent. You snip marjoram with a reverent hand, place it gently in your satchel, and then turn to the real prize, the soft veined leaves of the cheesecloth bush. Not its real name, of course, but that's what everyone calls it. It's used to wrap the wheels when they need a little coaxing, a little prayer. You breathe in the scent, earthy, anchoring, and for a moment you forget everything. Not the convent, not the stew, not the endless chores, or the stubborn mildew behind the eastern spigots. Just this patch of sun, this scent of leaf, this breath. You gather your herbs, nod once to the wind, and turn back toward the halls. A new bell tolls. More duties wait. But for now, the smell of marjoram follows you like a blessing. The bells finish their echo through the stone corridor, just as your sandals squeak slightly again against the freshly mopped floor. You glance down and whisper a brief apology to Sister Edith, who, if she were here, would be silently scandalised at the footprint. She's fond of saying cleanliness is next to godliness, but a dry hallway is next to sainthood. You press forward, herbs in your basket, the scent of marjoram clinging to your sleeves. You take the back route toward the dairy cellar, technically off limits, until the sun dips, but you have special permission today. The cheese needs turning, and the abbess trusts your hands more than the younger novices. Possibly because you haven't dropped a wheel in nearly a year. Possibly because you keep your jokes to a whisper, and only after vespers. The narrow stair creaks underfoot, and the cool damp of the cellar rises to meet you. Lanterns flicker dimly in iron brackets. Crates of vegetables line the wall, and beyond them they are the racks. Dozens of rounds cloaked in cloth resting on wooden shelves like sleeping saints. You breathe deeply. It smells glorious, sharp, rich, earthy. A touch sour, a touch divine. You set your basket down, tug your sleeves up, and begin the slow, reverent work. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval convents made their own cheese both for self-sufficiency and as a source of income. Some nuns developed highly specific recipes tied to feast days, medicinal needs, or the preferences of generous patrons. These weren't the bland peasant cheeses often associated with the era. but deeply cultivated, matured wheels with names, textures, and reputations. You start by unwrapping each cloth, inspecting the rind for softness, firmness, or worryingly uninvited fuzz. Most look perfect. One is slightly weepy. You whisper consolations to it and set it aside for further care. Then comes the turning. Gently you lift each round and rotate it a quarter turn on its board. Not too fast, not too hard, like waking a friend from a nap to tell them supper's ready. You've learned to love this part. It's quiet, methodical, and just the right amount of responsibility. Sometimes you imagine the cheese talks back. Not literally, though Sister Heloise once claimed a goat cheese gave her a vision of Saint Sebastian. But there's a kind of communication in the weight, the resistance, the scent. You're not shaping the cheese so much as listening to what it wants to be. You hum softly while you work one of the psalms maybe, or just a nonsense melody you half remember from childhood. Something warm, something with rhythm. Now for the quirky bit. In some convents it was believed that the success of a cheese could reflect the spiritual state of its maker. A nun with a restless heart might produce cracked rinds or sour curds. This led to entire kitchens built around harmony and intention. Some even held whispered prayers over fermenting milk. There are records of abbesses cancelling cheese batches during particularly tense chapters of community life, calling it a mercy to the livestock. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were sincere theology or just an early version of passive-aggressively telling someone to calm down. Was dairy a mirror for the soul, or just very fussy chemistry? You smile at the thought and pull a cloth tighter around the ripening wheel. It fits snugly like a child tucked into bed. After the turning comes the brining. You check the small tub, half full, slightly cloudy, perfectly normal. The salt content is key, and Sister Clarentia has been known to stick her finger in and proclaim the water not holy enough if the flavour is off. You just trust the ratio. 1 ladle of salt to 4 of water stirred until your arm goes numb and your thoughts wander off toward lunch. Once the final wheel is back in place, you make a few notes in the cellar log. Date, status, minor miracles. You draw a small smiling face next to the one you saved from the weepiness. It feels right. You gather your things and climb back into the hallway, blinking against the daylight that pours through the narrow lancet windows. Your stomach grumbles. The cheese is days from being ready, but your mind jumps ahead, roasted root vegetables, with soft goat curd fresh flatbread, and a dab of elderflower jelly. It's a fantasy. Tonight's dinner is likely boiled barley again, but you've made peace with barley, and with waiting. You pass Sister Agnes in the corridor. She's muttering to a basket of leeks, and doesn't look up. She's in her communing with produce phase again. You nod respectfully, and continue on. There's time before the next prayers. You slip into the chapel just for a moment. The air here is different, heavier, not solemn exactly, but textured, like walking through linen soaked in light. Dust motes drift like little lanterns. The scent of beeswax and dried lavender clings to the stones. You kneel, not because anyone told you to, and not to pray for something grand, just to be still. The hours between duties are few, but this pause is yours. Your knees ache after a minute. You shift. You press your hands flat to the floor and feel the chill of the stone. You whisper a line from a psalm, not the whole thing, just the piece that speaks to you today. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. You have never seen a green pasture, but you imagine it smells like the cheese cellar, or the herb garden, or the laundry courtyard when the linens are warm and flapping like sails against the sun. You rise again slowly, and as you leave the chapel, a breeze follows you out, soft, surprising, like someone remembering your name in a crowded room. There's still washing to do, still floor to scrub, still Sister Joanna to dodge. But for now you feel centered, and you swear the wheels in the cellar are aging just a bit more nobly for it. The sun is slanting toward afternoon, now filtering in with golden persistence through the stained glass near the south corridor. You squint up as it hits your face, warming your cheeks, while temporarily robbing you of the ability to tell whether Sister Joanna is heading your way or not. She is. You pivot neatly on your heel and take the longer route to the cloister's laundry courtyard, pretending to admire the basil pots with exaggerated interest. The herbs do smell good. You make a mental note to snag a few leaves later, just enough to flavour supper if no one notices. If you're caught, you'll claim culinary piety. Worked last time. The courtyard smells like sun and soap. Wooden tubs line the far side, some already steaming with boiled linen, others hosting a sullen parade of half-rinsed robes. Buckets, washboards, and wooden paddles lean haphazardly in the corners, like soldiers off duty. You know the drill. You roll your sleeves, you brace your feet, you pick the nearest tub and prepare for a wrist workout so intense it ought to be assigned a feast day. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many medieval nunneries, laundry was a regular part of the spiritual and communal rhythm. Cleanliness was symbolic purity of cloth reflecting purity of soul, but it was also practical, especially in large convents, where dozens of women lived, worked and worshipped in close quarters. Linen habits, woolen cloaks, bedding towels, someone had to scrub them all. Often that someone was you. You plunge your hands in. The water is hot, but not scalding. A blessing. The soap is homemade from leftover fat ashes and herbs and smells faintly of rosemary and regret. Scrubbing linen is not glamorous. It's all repetition and resistance. Rub, rinse, wring, repeat. Your knuckles sting and your arms ache in that special dull way that suggests you'll sleep hard and dream of sheep tonight. There's something comforting in the repetition though. You find a rhythm like a chant, a silent one. Rub, rinse, wring, breathe. Rub, rinse, wring, dream. Nearby, Sister Eloise is humming something tuneless but oddly hypnotic. She nods to you. You nod back. Neither of you says anything because talking means losing momentum, and worse, letting the elder sisters catch you enjoying yourself. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some convents, laundry soap was scented deliberately with herbs believed to ward off sin. Thyme for courage, mint for clarity, and lavender for chastity. There are even reports of nuns boiling scraps of parchment inscribed with psalms into the washwater, for particularly unruly linens, holy detergent as it were. Historians still argue whether this was sincere theology or just a creative attempt to kill laundry boredom with bonus points. Were the linens spiritually fortified or just really minty? You try to imagine your own robe full of lavender energy and decide you'd settle for it drying faster. Last time it rained and everything smelled like wet sheep for a week. You wring out a particularly stubborn habit, water splattering your sandals. One toe gets soaked. You sigh dramatically, just loud enough for Sister Eloise to smirk. In return, she flips a rinsed wimple onto your drying rack with all the grace of a trained falconer. It lands perfectly. You attempt the same. Your wimple catches the breeze and lands on a rake. Sister Eloise nods in approval. Very medieval, she says deadpan. You continue the game, each robe and tunic a test of arc and aim. By the time you're done, the line is full, and the wind makes the drying garments billow like a procession of very serious clouds. You both step back to admire the handiwork, and you notice the sky's changing. Clouds roll in, not dark, not ominous, just thick and slow-moving, like bread dough rising across the heavens. The breeze sharpens. The smell of rain teases your nose. You glance at the lines, you glance at the sky, you calculate. Too late. The first drop lands on your shoulder. The second hits your nose. Sister Eloise groans and makes a mad dash for the robes. You follow snatching tunics and cloaks with the speed of saints on market day. Within seconds, the courtyard is chaos robes, half flung over shoulders, towels slapping in the wind, water buckets toppling like startled sheep. Sister Joanna appears just in time to see you crash into a pail with your arms full of sopping linen. She does not look impressed, but she doesn't stop you either. Later, everything is hung under the eaves, safe from the weather and dripping like baptized sinners. You wring out your sleeves and shake the water from your bangs, muttering about divine timing. Sister Eloise hands you a mug of barley tea. It's lukewarm and gritty. Perfect. You sit on an overturned bucket watching the clouds pass. Now and then someone walks by and you nod the way laundry warriors do, a look that says, "We scrubbed, we sprinted, we survived." Your hands are pruny, your back is sore, but you feel good. Clean work, honest work, holy work depending on the soap. And as the wind stirs the eaves and the last droplets fall from the line, you wonder, what will you do when your hands no longer ache like this? You sip your tea and decide not to think that far ahead. Not when there's drying to do. And not when from the edge of the courtyard the kitchen bell starts to ring. Soup's ready. You abandon your bucket thrown past the now damp basil pot and return your borrowed mug with a wink. The soup smells like onions and hope. It's not cheese, but it'll do. By the time you return to the refectory, the soup is already being ladled out with a kind of solemn efficiency usually reserved for confession or funeral rites. You fall into line bowl in hand, your fingers still slightly wrinkled from the laundry tubs. Across the room, a young novice is trying to carry 3 loaves of bread at once. She drops one. A fellow sister picks it up, dusts it off with a dramatic flair, and hands it back with a shrug that says, "What the Lord sees is between you and him." You love this place. You take your soup, onion, barley, maybe turnip, and your slice of coarse brown bread, and you find a spot at the long table by the window. Sister Marguerite is already there, chewing, with the focus of someone solving a riddle. She nods as you sit. The rule of silence applies during meals, of course, but silence is a flexible concept. Coughs are allowed. So are throat-clearing spoon clinks, and the occasional eyebrow conversation that says more than words ever could. Today's eyebrows say, "Laundry rain again." You give a subtle smirk, again. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In most medieval nunneries, communal meals were eaten in silence, while a designated reader stood at a lectern and read aloud from scripture, hagiographies, or the writings of early church fathers. It was meant to nourish both body and spirit. Of course, sometimes it just meant trying to chew quietly through Leviticus. Today's reader is Sister Agnes, and she's chosen a particularly stern bit about the virtues of humility and resisting temptation. She's got the voice of a disgruntled librarian and the pace of a metronome. Still, she reads with conviction, and her occasional glances toward the bread basket suggest she's fasting again. You chew slowly, wondering whether Sister Agnes considers cheese a temptation or a triumph. Your soup has cooled enough to sip comfortably now. It's salty, but warming. Your bread is dense enough to be used as construction material, but you soften it with the broth and make a small game out of trying to eat it without making a noise. This is harder than it sounds when your jaw's tired from chanting and your stomach is convinced it's been wronged. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some convents had designated food sign languages, so nuns could request more wine bread or cheese without breaking the silence rule. The sign for cheese, a sort of pinching motion near the mouth mimicking the act of nibbling a soft wedge. Unfortunately, that same gesture could also mean I'm cold depending on the region, so confusion was frequent. One particularly hungry sister once ended up wrapped in 2 blankets and still cheeseless. Historians still argue whether these mealtime hand signals reflected efficient community practices or just a cryptic pantomime of starvation. Were they practical or performance art? You polish off the last spoonful of soup and set your bowl down with exaggerated care, glancing around to make sure you didn't slurp too loudly. Sister Marguerite gives you an approving nod. You beam. Dessert isn't a thing here unless it's a feast day, but sometimes someone forgets a fig in their pocket. Today, it's you. You tear it in half and pass a piece to Marguerite beneath the table like a conspirator in a heist film. She mouths "bless you." The reading ends. Sister Agnes closes the book with a soft thunk, and everyone bows their heads for the final prayer. The silence becomes real again, not just rule-following quiet, but the kind that settles over a full stomach and a peaceful room, the kind of hush that lingers. And then movement. Everyone stands, collects their bowls and files toward the kitchen, where the scullery sisters wait with steaming tubs and weary eyes. You add your bowl to the stack, thank them silently, and give the cheese sign just for fun. They do not laugh. You step outside, squinting at the sun. It's lower now, dusting the courtyard in amber. Shadows stretch and birds begin their evening chorus with all the chaotic joy of amateur choirs. You pause to watch a sparrow struggle with a twig that's clearly too big for its nest. You whisper, "Ambitious," and move on. Afternoons in the convent are for work, but gentle work if the day's been productive. Today's assignment is candle rolling, which sounds delicate until you realise it involves hot wax fine linen wicks and your very real ability to accidentally glue your sleeves to the table. You enter the workshop where the air smells of beeswax and warm wood. Long tables are set up with trays of melted wax, bowls of water, and neat piles of prepared wick strings. You take a seat and start the familiar routine. Dip, cool, roll, repeat. Dip, cool, roll. It's hypnotic, almost soothing, especially after the scrubbing chaos earlier. The wax coats your fingers, then peels away in tiny translucent gloves. You shape each candle carefully, trying to get the taper just right. Some come out lopsided. You pretend they're symbolic. Here's the thing about candle rolling, you do it in silence, but the silence hums. There's a rhythm here, like chanting, but without the notes. Every now and then someone sighs or hums or knocks a bowl by accident. It's not disruptive, it's music made of intention. Now for your afternoon's fringe tidbit. A few nunneries in the 13th century experimented with scented candles, adding crushed herbs or oils to the wax as a kind of sensory offering during Vespers. One particular abbey became notorious for its rosemary-lavender blend, which supposedly made the choir so relaxed they kept missing their cues. Historians still argue whether those scented candles were an early form of liturgical aromatherapy or simply an accident involving leaky herb jars. Either way, someone lit a prayer and sneezed through the Magnificat. You finish your 6th candle and set it gently on the rack, proud despite its bulbous middle. Sister Marguerite gives you a look that says, "Not your worst, you take that as a win." The sun dips low enough to cast golden beams across the stone floor. Someone opens a window. The breeze carries in the scent of apples, wet grass, and something baking bread for tomorrow maybe. Or dreams hardening into crust. You roll one more candle slower this time. Your hands move without thinking, your breath steady. This is what peace looks like: lumpy wax, crooked light, shared silence. The bell rings for Vespers. You rise. Another candle will have to wait. The bell chimes again, long, steady, unmistakable. You set down your last candle, flex your fingers, and rub a smudge of beeswax from your sleeve. Although, let's be honest, that stain is here to stay. Sister Marguerite gives you the eyebrow nod of shared weariness. You return it with the equally sacred look that says, "If I fall asleep during Vespers, cover for me." You file out of the candle workshop and into the cool hallway, feet soft against the flagstone habits, rustling like pages turning in a prayer book. The air changes here. It always does before evening prayers, less like walking into a room, more like stepping into a hush made of stone and incense. Vespers is where the day exhales. You reach the chapel and bow slightly before entering, because of course you do. The space is already glowing with low candlelight, none of which are the misshapen ones you rolled earlier. Thank heavens. A large crucifix looms at the far end, its carved wood softened by time and candle smoke. The smell here is sacred and strangely comforting, old wax lavender oil, and something faintly metallic, maybe the brass candle holders, or the heavy bell in the tower. You slip into your place near the back, the same worn bench where you sit every evening. The wooden seat remembers your shape. You kneel, bow sit and breathe. Here's your mainstream historical fact: Vespers, part of the Liturgy of the Hours, was one of 7 canonical prayer times observed daily by monastic communities. It marked the beginning of the evening and was usually sung or chanted in Latin, though some later orders translated it into the local tongue for accessibility. Still, the structure, psalms, hymns, readings, responses, was carefully kept to spiritual rhythm as dependable as sunrise. Tonight's chant begins soft and slow, led by Sister Cecilia, whose voice always sounds like warm broth on a winter day. You don't know how she does it. Her lungs are the size of apples, but she manages to hold the final note of the opening antiphon longer than seems strictly natural. You follow along, your voice weaving gently into the collective. You don't push, you don't shine, you just blend. And in that blending, there's peace. A psalm about mercy, a hymn about guidance, a reading from Isaiah that frankly always confuses you, but you nod anyway. The cadence matters more than comprehension tonight. The words settle around you, like a blanket stitched from centuries of repetition. Now for the quirky bit. In some medieval nunneries, the nuns would hum, when they forgot the Latin words, an old trick called murmuring to the Holy Spirit. If enough sisters forgot the same line, the chant would just slide into a communal hum until someone bravely guessed the next word. Legend says one nun once hummed her way through an entire Vespers service after sneezing and losing her place. No one noticed. Historians still argue whether this sort of flexible chanting reflects a deeper spiritual focus or just an overworked choir with limited rehearsal time. Was it devotional innovation or tactical mumbling? You glance at the stained glass as the final hymn begins. The sunset slants through coloured panes, painting the pews in saffron and teal. A shadow of St. Margaret dances across the stone floor, one arm eternally outstretched, as if beckoning someone just out of reach. The final amen hangs in the air for a heartbeat longer than usual. Then silence, real silence, no scraping benches, no whispered corrections, just the kind that settles inside your chest and pushes the dust out. You file out with the others, nodding to Sister Cecilia, who gives you a smile that's half weary, half luminous. You once tried to describe her face to a visiting abbot and ended up saying she looked like she'd been carved from prayer itself. He laughed, but he didn't disagree. Outside, twilight has officially arrived, not golden hour anymore. Now it's the blue hour, the world caught between breath and whisper. The courtyard is lit only by a few lanterns, and the moon is just beginning to peek over the rooftops. You don't return to your room yet. Instead, you take the long way around the herb garden. The mint glows faintly silver in the moonlight, and the lavender stalks sway like sleepy sentries. The path curves around the chicken coop, silent now, its occupants already dreaming of grain and rebellion. You pause near the old well. They say, if you drop a plum pit in at night and make a wish, the convent cat will show up and blink at you knowingly the next morning. You tried it once. The cat blinked. You were impressed. You continue past the orchard, bare branches now, just a few stubborn apples clinging on, like martyrs. Then the bee chapel, locked for winter, where hives sleep under bundled straw. You remember Sister Joelle calling it the holiest corner of the grounds, because it buzzes with patience. You circle back toward your cell, nodding at the last candlelit window. Someone's finishing their stitching for the day. The light flickers once and goes out. You reach your door, slide it open and step inside. Your cell is humble. A small bed, a stool, a writing shelf, a woolen blanket that smells like a sheep with good intentions. Your candle stub is just long enough to last you one more night. You light it. Here's your fringe tidbit. In certain nunneries, especially in colder regions, sisters were allowed to keep comfort objects, usually small stuffed bundles of fabric, or carved wooden animals that acted as prayer companions. One surviving account describes a nun who kept a walnut shell filled with lavender and whispered her confessions into it each night. It was buried with her, probably smelled great. Historians still debate whether these comfort rituals were tolerated indulgences or quiet acts of rebellion against austerity. Were they spiritual aids or small acts of resistance stitched in wool? You change into your nightrobe, tuck your feet under the blanket, and open the small book of hours you keep beside your bed. Just one page tonight. Your eyes are tired and your body has begun to relax in that slow, satisfying way that means sleep is near. You whisper a final prayer, not because it's required, but because it feels like punctuation, a comma at the end of the day, not a full stop, not yet. You blow out the candle. Darkness wraps the room in velvet. Outside, the wind brushes past the shutters like a blessing. The night is thick now, Quiet has settled like a second blanket, softer than wool, warmer than rules. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaks under the foot of a sister, on her own round of whispered prayers, or perhaps just sneaking a biscuit from the kitchen. You do not judge. You understand. But for you, the rhythm continues with the earliest sound of the new day matins. You don't wake by alarm. You wake because your body has been trained to. The chapel bell rings in a long, slow toll that vibrates through the stone walls and into your bones. It's not even close to sunrise. The moon is still wide awake, hanging like a ghostly plate over the orchard. You rise, rubbing your eyes with fingers that still smell faintly of beeswax and mint. Your robe's hem brushes the floor as you dress quickly, layering wool against the chill. Your slippers, worn to the shape of your feet, make only the faintest scuff as you step into the hallway. The convent is different at this hour, dimmer, almost dreamlike. Shadows curl along the floor like shy cats. The flicker of one candle in the far end of the corridor catches the outline of a crucifix, and nothing else. You move in silence. Matins is not glamorous, it's not even particularly melodic. It's the deep heartbeat of the monastic rhythm, meant to shake sleep loose and offer something solemn to the dark hours. You and the others gather in the chapel again, the same place you sat for Vespers, but now it feels like an entirely different world. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Matins was traditionally held in the middle of the night, or very early morning, depending on the local custom. It was part of the divine office, the cycle of prayers that marked each part of the day. In some particularly ascetic orders, matins could last up to 2 hours and be followed immediately by Lauds, another full prayer session. Sleep was a luxury, but prayer was a duty. You bow before entering, of course, and once again you take your usual seat. But this time your breath comes slower. The words, when they start, are quieter, more like a tide than a tune. Sister Anne, half asleep, begins the antiphon with a voice that sounds like it crawled out of a dream and hasn't fully arrived yet. You smile slightly. That's the thing about matins. It's not about beauty. It's about presence, showing up when it's hard. Your own voice joins in, low and steady, weaving itself into the chorus like another thread in a woolen blanket. You don't think, you don't evaluate, you just sing. Now, the quirky bit. There's an old convent tale that claims any nun who manages to stay awake through every matins for 40 nights straight is rewarded with a divine vision. The catch: no one remembers what the vision is. One record claims a sister saw a lamb made of sunlight. Another swore it was a wheel of cheese floating in the sky. Both seem equally valid at 3 a.m. Historians still argue whether these visions were genuine spiritual experiences or just the hallucinatory side effects of chronic sleep deprivation. Were they signs from above, or the imagination's last-ditch effort to stay amused? The candles flicker gently as matins drifts toward its end. You murmur the final prayers with lips barely moving. A silence follows that is less an absence of sound, and more a presence of stillness. You rise with the others, moving like a procession of shadows back to your cells. Except you don't go straight back to sleep. Instead, you follow your own little ritual, stepping outside for a moment into the open cloister where the sky has shifted from black to a deep indigo. The stars are fading now, and the wind carries the faintest scent of dew, and something sweeter, apple blossom. Perhaps memory. You walk the perimeter once, just once, bare feet on stone, your breath visible in the air. You nod to the moon like it's an old friend who's about to head home. It nods back, or maybe that's just a passing cloud. Then finally your bed. You slip under the blanket again this time, more grateful. You lie there with your hands folded on your stomach, the way the older sisters always do. Supposedly, it helps prepare the body for rest. Possibly also for burial, but let's not dwell on that. Your mind flickers briefly through the psalms you just recited. You wonder if they stick somewhere inside you, like breadcrumbs through a forest. If someday, when your voice is gone, your bones will still hum them in the dark. Before your thoughts grow too philosophical, sleep takes you, just briefly, because sunrise is coming, and with it the cows. Yesterday is your cheese rotation again. You know this because Sister Beatrix made eye contact during matines, and her expression said only one thing. I'm not touching the rennet. It's your turn. You dream briefly of soft curds forming under moonlight. Then the bell rings again. You're up, again. You wash quickly at the basin, ignoring the icy sting of the water. You wrap your scarf over your ears and step into the chill of early morning. This time, it's real morning. The sky's pale, the birds are confused but awake, and the cows are already lowing in the field with the urgency of creatures who understand breakfast. You and Sister Beatrix meet near the barn, armed with pails and a shared grimace. The cows eye you like judges at a culinary competition. This will not be glamorous, but it will be productive. You pat the nearest cow's flank, mutter a blessing, and get to work. The rhythm is familiar. Hand, pail, warmth, steam rising from the milk like a whispered encouragement. The cows grumble and shift, but they know you. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some nunneries believed that reciting a psalm while milking cows improved the milk's yield and flavour. One particular psalm, whispered just right, was said to produce the creamiest curds. Another legend says a sister once sang an entire Easter hymn, and the cow gave enough milk for 3 wheels of cheese and a small miracle. You glance over at Sister Beatrix. She's humming something. You join in. The cows approve. The sun rises behind the orchard, washing the fields in gold. And you, sitting on a stool, milking a patient cow and humming a slightly off-key hymn, begin to suspect that maybe this is the best moment of the day. No glory, no drama, just purpose. And cheese. The milk is still warm in the pail when you and Sister Beatrix return to the convent kitchen, each of you carrying your bounty with the reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. The morning sun has risen fully now, sliding through the high windows in slanted gold, making the worn stone floor glow as though it remembers 100 similar mornings. Inside the kitchen is already half alive. A pot rattles gently on the hearth. A novice is pounding herbs in a mortar with all the subtlety of a siege. Someone else sneezes twice and mutters a prayer to Sant Fiacre, patron of gardeners, and apparently today congested cooks. You set the milk down on the wooden table near the cheese station. Yes, there is a cheese station. A whole side table scrubbed smoother than polished pewter, dedicated to the ancient art of curdling with dignity. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval convents and monasteries were known for their dairying expertise. Cheese making was not only a staple of their daily diet, but also a source of income, trade, and even occasional prestige. Certain abbeys were famous for soft herb-laced rounds or wheels cured in cellars for weeks. The sisters didn't just eat cheese, they cultivated it, perfected it, respected it. You fetch the rennet, a complicated little pouch that smells faintly of sadness and possibility, and add it to the warmed milk with a slow stirring motion. The rhythm is meditative. You might not have been allowed to wield a sword, but you can certainly wield a spoon with solemnity. As the curds begin to form, Sister Beatrix starts laying out the cloths. They're muslin stitched at the edges by someone with far better needlework than you. You try not to be envious. Everyone has their gifts. Yours just involve patience and bacteria. Now the quirky bit, some convents bless their cheese wheels with holy water before aging them in the cellar. One abbess even created a special cheese blessing chant that involved 4 lines of Latin and one awkward clapping rhythm. No one knew whether the claps were symbolic or just her own flair, but the cheese was excellent, so no one complained. The curds are ready. You ladle them gently into the cloth-lined moulds, trying not to splash. Cheese, like prayer, is about control and surrender, and not getting it all over your robes. You press them down lightly, set the weights on top, and whisper a little wish into the soft mounds of future deliciousness. Not a prayer exactly, more of a hope that the batch holds together, that the mould behaves, that your work, quiet and slow and unremarked, turns into something nourishing. Historians still argue whether cheese-making in convents was considered a higher domestic art or just an obligatory task assigned to the most reliable sisters. Was it culinary devotion, or simply one more form of obedience disguised as dairy? Either way, you stand there beside the press hands on your hips, a smear of whey across your sleeve, and you feel honestly a little proud. No one wrote songs about this, no one drew saints with curds in their hands. But this too is holy work. As the cheeses rest, you help clean the station, scrub the pails, rinse the cloths, scold a novice who nearly drops an entire wheel trying to move it with one hand. And then you steal a moment, just a moment, for yourself. You take a heel of yesterday's bread, still crusty, and cut a sliver of cheese so thin it might as well be wishful thinking. You place both on a chipped dish and carry them outside to the herb garden. The sun is higher now. Bees are working the lavender like it's a government job. A pair of robins argue in the elderberry bush, probably about worms. You sit beneath the fig tree, back resting against the bark, and you eat. Slowly, quietly, like it's a ritual of its own. The bread is dry, the cheese is soft, the flavour is sharp, salty, real. You made this. You... In a world that so often reduces women to shadows, and servants, you've shaped something that stands, that feeds, that waits on no praise but carries its worth in silence. You finish, brush the crumbs from your lap, and gather your thoughts. There's always more to do. Laundry to help with, a leaky gutter along the cloister walk, the little matter of fixing the windowsill where a squirrel chewed through last winter. But for now, you rest your head back against the tree and close your eyes. Just for a minute, just long enough to feel the sun on your face, and the breeze in your hair, and the faint sense of being exactly where you're supposed to be. Because yes, you're a nun. Yes, you follow the rule. Yes, you sing the hours and scrub the floors, and whisper prayers into your pillow. But you're also a maker of cheese, a quiet architect of sustenance. And you think just for a moment that this might be enough. Chairman Spitz appears around the fig bush, as if summoned by the scent of rennet. He glares at your empty dish and lets out a long disapproving snort. You toss him a crust and he snatches it mid-air, chewing, with unnecessary smugness. You lean back again, eyes still closed. Another bell rings in the distance. You groan softly, then rise. Your day isn't over. But this, at least this tiny slice of time, was yours. The afternoon bell rings a little slower than usual, like it knows your knees are still grumbling from cheese duty. You sigh quietly, reverently, as is the nunly way, and make your way toward the south cloister. It's laundry time. Yes, the rule says cleanliness is next to godliness, but you suspect it was a particularly smug abbess who interpreted that to mean every sister must spend a few hours a week soaking her knuckles in icy water and wrestling linen that weighs more than a tired ox. You arrive at the washing yard, where long wooden tubs sit like shallow boats, steam rising faintly from one where someone's managed to heat the water. Several sisters are already at work, sleeves rolled up, scarves tied over their hair muscles, flexing beneath layers of modesty. You greet them with a nod and grab a bar of soap made from lye and last season's leftover tallow. It smells like regret and cleanliness. Your first assignment: habit linens, specifically the underpieces, the parts no one ever sees, but everyone definitely notices if they go unwashed. Here's your mainstream. Historical fact: medieval nuns, despite their reputation for ethereal serenity, were deeply involved in domestic labour, laundering habits, repairing robes, maintaining the bedding. Most convents had designated washhouses and laundry days with rotas carefully managed to ensure each sister shared the load and, incidentally, the blisters. You dunk the cloth into the basin and begin to scrub. It's not glamorous, but there's something meditative about it. The swish of fabric, the rhythm of the brush, the way the sun warms your back through your veil. Across from you, Sister Agnes is arguing with the wind again. Not in anger, just debating the theological implications of a particularly aggressive breeze. You smile and nod, glad you're not the one assigned to interpret her dreams tonight. The linen slips from your hands and slaps into the tub with a splash. Cold water arcs into your face. You blink. The sisters laugh softly. You laugh too. Now the quirky bit: one Benedictine convent in France, according to a preserved visitor's letter, had a long-standing superstition that hanging laundry out to dry on feast days would offend St. Lawrence. On one occasion, they hurriedly pulled all the sheets down mid-drying when they realised it was the feast of St. Avitus, just in case he counted. Several sheets were never seen again, suspicious wind or divine commentary unclear. You wring out the fabric and begin the rinsing stage. The well water is cold enough to make you consider sainthood by hypothermia. Your fingers turn pink. Your elbows ache. Historians still argue whether this kind of physical labour was viewed by nuns as a spiritual discipline, or merely endured with dignified grumbling. Was it prayer through effort, or just one more way the abbess got to avoid doing her own socks? The rinse finished, you help string the linens onto the rope line, which has been stretched between two mulberry trees, like a very humble cathedral of fluttering banners. The wind immediately lifts the cloth, giving it the illusion of holiness. You squint. One of the undergarments is hanging by a single clothespin and looks oddly triumphant. You step back, take a breath, and let the breeze dry your face. Then, like some domestic pilgrimage, you move to the mending bench. There's a pile of worn garments, waiting habits, with split seams, socks with noble but failed ambitions, aprons that have definitely seen battle. You select a tunic with a ripped hem and begin stitching. Your fingers are not elegant. You have never been praised for your needlework, but you do it, because it must be done, because some labours are not for beauty, but for continuity. A novice joins you. She's 12. She's trying to act like she isn't bored. You offer her a needle, and she takes it like it's cursed. Together, you sew in mostly silence, save for the occasional hiss of poked fingers, and the breeze teasing the laundry line like a flirt. And this is the truth no one writes in the illuminated margins. Being a nun isn't just about prayer or purity, or that one halo in the stained glass window that makes everyone look serene. It's also about wet socks and cold hands, and the quiet triumph of fixing something with a thread too short and a needle too blunt. You finish the hem. It's not pretty, but it will hold. You stand and stretch, eyeing the basket of dry linens waiting to be folded. Another hour, maybe 2. But you don't mind. This is the shape of your life. Quiet work, repetition, shared space. And in that repetition you find a kind of grace. There are days when it feels like drudgery, days when you dream of running off to a vineyard in Tuscany, or becoming a pirate nun with a pet heron and a thirst for wine. But not today. Today the wind is gentle, the sun is kind, the soap stings a little less than it used to, and when you catch your reflection in the rippling water of the washtub, you look dare you think it content. You carry the basket back toward the cloister hallway, balanced carefully on your hip. Chairman Spitz is asleep on the stair-belly to the sky, daring the world to step over him. You do. Inside the corridor is cool and echoing. You deposit the basket outside the laundry room and pause. Another task done. Another sliver of the day shaped and folded into purpose. You press your hands together, whisper a tiny thank you to the thread that didn't snap and step into the next silence. Because that's what this life is, one breath between labours. One heartbeat between vespers and dinner. And you still damp from the wash basin and smiling without knowing why are exactly where you're meant to be. You're halfway through stepping into the refectory when the smell hits you lentils. Again, but not the nice kind. This is the medieval monastery equivalent of we cleaned the pantry and found sadness. You brace yourself. Supper is a humble affair as always. You sit in silence on your designated bench, lower your head for the blessing, and then accept your wooden bowl of beige with as much grace as you can muster. The bread is dry, the water is tepid, and someone near you is chewing like it's a full-contact sport. Still you eat, slowly, methodically. The refectory is quiet except for the clink of spoons and the occasional throat clearing that echoes like a Gregorian chant gone rogue. A lector at the far end reads from scripture, in a measured drone, the kind of cadence that could convince a squirrel to convert. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval convents adhered strictly to the rule of St. Benedict when it came to meals, meaning they were taken in silence, accompanied by scripture or hagiographies, and often featured a rotation of simple, mostly vegetarian fare. Meat was generally reserved for the sick or travelling, though clever nuns sometimes reclassified things like otters and puffins as fish in a glorious act of theological loopholing. You scrape your bowl clean with a piece of bread. It helps, barely. Next to you, Sister Honoria gives a small nod of approval. She's the best eater in the house. Legend has it, she once consumed 3 hard-boiled eggs in one sitting and still had room for a plum tart. You aspire to such feats. Now for the quirky bit, a 14th century convent in what's now Belgium reportedly held an annual feast of slight excess, during which the sisters would enjoy one mildly indulgent meal, often boiled cabbage with extra herbs, and then spend the rest of the day apologising in verse. One recovered parchment included the line, "Forgive us, Saint Jerome, for the thyme and the garlic." You finish your supper and join the others in stacking the bowls, wiping down the table with damp cloths that have seen better centuries, and sweeping the stone floor with a broom so blunt it's more symbolic than effective. As the sun dips lower, casting long bars of gold across the cloister hallway, you file quietly into the chapel for vespers. The walls are cool, the air smells faintly of wax and lavender oil. Your sandals slap gently against the stone. You take your place on the worn wooden bench and open your psalter. Vespers, the last great pause before nightfall, a time to settle the soul. Or, if you're being honest, to try not to fall asleep during the responsorial. The chanting begins, slow, measured. The voices rise and fall like breath itself, weaving through the candlelight and stone archways. It's not beautiful in the way choirs are in movies, it's off-key, slightly nasal, and wholly human, and somehow that's better. Here's where historians still argue. Was the daily rhythm of prayer in convents truly spiritually enriching, or did it function more like social cohesion, disguised in song? Did it bring the sisters closer to the divine, or simply keep them from throttling each other over laundry disputes? You hum softly, half reading, half feeling the words. The Latin is familiar now. It's muscle memory more than meaning. As the last verse echoes, the prioress rises to offer a brief reflection, something about humility and patience, which seems suspiciously tailored to whoever dropped that inkpot earlier. You bow your head, trying not to smirk. After prayers, you shuffle out into the cloister garden, where the twilight has dipped everything into shades of blue and silver. A breeze rustles the herbs. Someone has left a basket of chamomile blossoms on the bench. You pocket one not for tea, but because it's soft and smells faintly like a memory you haven't placed yet. You cross paths with a novice chasing a cat that absolutely does not want to be caught. The cat wins. Chairman Spitz lounges atop a barrel, smug as ever. You nod, he yawns, a truce as usual. The evening bell rings one final time, low and resonant, like the world taking a breath. And you return to your cell. It's the same as ever. Straw mattress, folded blanket, a tiny wooden cross above the lintel, and a shelf with 3 books, one of which is always upside down, no matter what you do. A small lamp flickers gently, casting shadows, like brush strokes on the wall. You sit, unwrap the linen from your hair, and brush off the dust of the day. There's no grand ceremony here, no final act, just the closing of a small chapter in a long, steady rhythm. You stretch, you yawn, you whisper a prayer that might be gratitude, might be hope, might just be your way of saying goodnight to the universe. Then, as always, you check your sandals for beetles. Because once was enough. You blow out the lamp. The world goes dark, but not unkind. And as your thoughts settle, shaped by ritual and softened by the ordinary, you feel yourself drift. Not away, just deeper. It's early again, the kind of early that feels both eternal and vaguely offensive. Your eyes flutter open to the now familiar sounds, someone coughing in the hallway with theatrical flair, the creak of a wooden bucket handle being hoisted at the well, the sharp caw of a raven who apparently missed the quiet monastery memo. You stretch, your back cracks in 3 places. That counts as morning prayer, right? The air in your cell is brisk. You tug your woolen wrap a little tighter and sit upright on your straw mattress. It pokes you in defiance. The candle stub you lit last night has dissolved into a wax puddle with ideas above its station. You make a mental note to trim the wick tonight. Your first task today isn't prayer, or cheese, or sweeping cat fur from the narthex. It's laundry. And not just yours. The entire convent's laundry rota has turned its merciless gaze your way. You're today's aqua sister, which means you'll spend the next few hours elbow deep in buckets, whispering unprintable things to linen that was last wiped sometime before the Crusades. You shuffle into the workroom and greet the other aqua sister, Sister Beatrix, who's already stoking the fire beneath the large copper cauldron. She grunts. That's her version of "Good morning, dear soul." The water begins to bubble. The lye soap, shaved into curls with a small knife, waits beside a crate of linen shifts, headcloths, and an apron with a mysterious, possibly eternal stain. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Most medieval convents were entirely self-sufficient, meaning the nuns handled their own laundering, sewing, brewing, and maintenance. Laundry was typically done once a week, or in rotation by duty, involving boiling water, ash-based soap, and a great deal of manual wringing. It was as brutal on the knuckles as it was on the fabric. You dunk the first shift and stir it with a wooden paddle. It's like cooking soup if soup judged you silently and slapped you when wet. Sister Beatrix sighs and starts humming what might be a hymn, or possibly a passive-aggressive dirge about soiled linens. You nod along occasionally, checking for beetles. You never quite trust that laundry pile. The morning light slants through the shutter slats, warming the wet stone floor just enough to make your toes curl. You hang the first line of clean garments out in the garden, carefully clipping them to the rope, with clothespins that seem determined to snap your fingers. Now for the quirky bit. A set of 12th century washing instructions from a German convent included a written laundry blessing meant to be spoken while stirring the pots, supposedly to prevent stains and wicked lingering odours. One version translated loosely as "May the Lord banish mildew and the smell of Brother Alaric's boots." You repeat it under your breath. Can't hurt. Back in the garden, the laundry flaps gently in the breeze like saints in training. A cat stalks beneath the drying line, clearly plotting a felony. You throw a clothespin near him. He blinks once, then knocks over a bucket in retaliation. Chairman Spitz appears from nowhere and chases the cat down the cloister path like a fuzzy missile. Justice is swift. You carry another basket outside. Sister Honoria joins you to help fold the dry linens, and she tells you a story about a nun in her youth who sewed secret messages into towel hems and then forgot where she hid them. Some messages were still being discovered years later, including one that simply read, "This soup is a lie." Historians still argue whether daily chores like laundry fostered deeper spiritual humility or simply wore the sisters down into submission. Did repetitive work instill virtue or just sore wrists? Was it divine order or medieval micromanagement? You fold another shift, your fingers red and slightly wrinkled, and think probably both. Once the washing is done and the fire tamped down, you finally have a small window of unstructured time. And naturally, you go to the garden. Not for work for once, but for solitude. The herb beds are freshly watered. The thyme is thriving. The lavender leans over the path like it's offering advice. You find a stool beneath the old pear tree and just sit. No parchment, no scrolls, no lectures on humility from Sister Augustine. Just you and the breeze. The sun glints on the stone walls. Bees flirt with the rosemary. Somewhere in the distance a cow sneezes. You hope someone's written that into the community chronicle. Your thoughts wander past the cheese press, the refectory, the quiet chapel at dusk. You think about the rhythm of the days, the repetition of chores, the sameness of it all. And somehow it doesn't feel dull. It feels safe, predictable, held, even if your hands still smell like wet wool and desperation. You rise and pluck a few sprigs of lemon balm to tuck into your sleeves. Later, when you pray, it will smell like summer. You return to your cell to swap your damp apron for a fresh one. The blanket on your bed is folded precisely the way you left it. The wax blob on the shelf has somehow doubled in size. everything in its place. You smile, because maybe this is what being a medieval nun who just wanted to make cheese actually looks like: laundry buckets, pear trees, elbow grease, and wax that refuses to behave. And somehow, against all logic, it's enough. The bell tolls once. Not the big one, not the one used to summon everyone for vespers or emergency goat-related incidents. This is the small brass handbell, the one that signals a community gathering of a softer kind. You wipe your hands on your apron and follow the quiet flow of sisters toward the chapter house. There's no urgent business today, no dramatic confessions or stern letters from the bishop. Just the weekly reading. It's your turn, of course, because naturally your name was chosen last week, while you were elbow deep in curds and missed the vote. You take your seat near the front and glance down at the parchment in your lap. It's a homily long, rambling, and a little sleepier than usual. You clear your throat. The room hushes. And you begin to read. Softly, evenly, no drama. The words rise and fall like a lullaby echoing gently against the stone walls. A few sisters close their eyes, not out of disrespect, but because this too is part of the rhythm. The voice of one speaking to many. The pulse of shared silence between the lines. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In most medieval convents, communal readings, especially from religious texts or saints' lives, were a regular part of life. These sessions weren't just about instruction. They helped reinforce unity and served as gentle reminders of faith, humility, and the importance of listening, truly listening. You finish the final line and look up. A few nods, one soft amen. Sister Juliana is definitely asleep, but she'll claim contemplative meditation later. Everyone rises and files out. You stay a moment longer, letting the quiet settle. Now for your fringe tidbits. Some convents encouraged marginalia, that is, tiny drawings or commentaries scribbled into the margins of copied texts. While many were devotional in nature, a surprising number were not. Rabbits jousting, cats wearing mitres, a cow giving unsolicited theological opinions. Some scholars believe these were subtle acts of self-expression, sanctioned or otherwise. You make a mental note to doodle something small in your own breviary later, maybe a wheel of cheese with a halo. You leave the chapter house and walk slowly toward the scriptorium. Not to write, not today, but to dust. Your secondary assignment this week is upkeep, meaning you're the lucky soul, in charge of wiping down lecterns, restacking parchment, and chasing quills that have mysteriously rolled under benches. The room smells of ink, dust, and quiet ambition. You run a cloth over Sister Anselma's desk, careful not to dislodge the precarious tower of scrolls she's balancing like a scriptorial game of Jenga. You spot a half-written psalm on the windowsill, catch a glimpse of a correction where "deliver us from evil" was briefly "deliver us from eels." You choose not to say anything. You sweep the floor, gather scraps, and light a new candle at the altar niche. Outside the window, the sky's sliding toward amber. Late afternoon. Almost time for prayer again. But first, one final duty. You make your way back to the kitchen. The cheese presser waits. The curds have drained for a full day now. The whey's been poured off. It's time to flip and salt. You unwrap the linen carefully. The smell that greets you is assertive, but promising, like confidence wearing boots. The wheel of cheese is misshapen, a little lopsided, but solid. Honest. You dust your hands with salt and rub it along the surface, pressing it into every crease. It glistens in the dim light, pale and proud, and entirely your doing. You wrap it again and place it on the aging shelf row 7-4 between a sharp goat blend and something that might be an accident. Here's where the real patience begins. Cheese doesn't rush. Neither do you. Historians still argue whether convent kitchens were centres of innovation or simply functional hubs. Some point to early herbal infusions and brewing methods pioneered by women in religious orders. Others argue that while monks got all the fame for cheese and beer, nuns quietly out-fermented everyone without a shred of bragging. Because of course they did. You wash your hands, roll your shoulders, and return to the cloister walk. The sun slants long across the flagstones. Shadows stretch like monks late to supper. You pause under the archway, where someone's carved a tiny fish into the mortar. You've never asked who did it. You don't need to know. You walk the cloister path 3 times slowly barefoot now, letting the cool stone ease your joints, each lap a little quieter, a little softer. Sister Elfrida passes you carrying a stack of folded linens and humming something that's either a hymn or a lullaby for bread dough. You nod. She nods. That's enough. You return to your cell just before the bell. You light your candle. Unroll your blanket. Slide the door closed. The world presses in, not as a burden, but as a whisper. You've scrubbed floors and pressed cheese and read aloud to the sound of snoring and epiphany alike. You've made it through another day in a life where nothing is grand and everything matters. And as your head rests against the scratchy edge of your pillow, you think this is what you chose. This small, strange, blessed rhythm. Where you wake with the crows and rest with the cheese and write poems in the dust behind the altar table. It's not sainthood, but it's yours. The final bell rings. Not loudly, not with any drama, just one long low note drifting across the quiet courtyard, as if even the bell knows it's time to soften. You blink in the candlelight, stretch under your blanket, and rise one last time for the day. Compline waits, night prayer, the final breath of the convent schedule. The closing bracket to everything you've scrubbed, stirred, sung and salted since dawn. You shuffle into your shoes, adjust your wimple, and step into the hallway. Your feet don't echo now. Everyone walks lighter in the evening. Not because they're tired, though yes, very much so, but because the hush is sacred. You don't break the quiet after sundown, unless something's on fire, and even then preferably whisper about it first. The chapel glows with candlelight when you arrive. Gold halos flicker around the painted saints. The scent of old incense hangs in the air, lavender and pine. Sisters bow in turn, settle into their wooden stools and fold their hands. You do the same. The words of Compline flow like a lullaby, familiar, soothing, faintly mumbled in the way of every nightly prayer that's ever been half dreamt. You say them from memory, your voice joining the collective hum that wraps around the chapel like a quilt. Here's your last mainstream historical fact. Compline wasn't just a ritual, it was a threshold, the prayer that marked the end of worldly obligation and invited the soul to rest. It's where fear of the night of sin of shadow was soothed not by fire or force, but by surrender. Monastic communities from the 5th century onward practiced it as a way to let go, every evening, every day, without fail. The final words are spoken. Shed upon us the brightness of your light. A soft exhale from the group. One sister quietly clears her throat. Another stifles a yawn. You all rise together. You bow to the altar, to each other. And then you're free. You walk slowly back to your cell, letting your fingers trail along the cool stone wall, counting the tiny cracks you've memorized, like old psalms. The moonlight filters through the high windows, brushing the flagstones in silver. You feel it on your cheek, like the softest hand. Now for the quirky fringe bit. Some nuns used to tie small bundles of herbs lavender, time rose petals to their bedposts, or slip them inside pillowcases. Not just for scent, but for dreams. A kind of botanical encouragement to keep the nightmares at bay. One German abbey swore by tucking a sliver of holy candle wax inside a shoe under the bed to prevent sleepwalking. Another reportedly painted tiny stars on the inside of their shutters so that even in darkness there was a sky. You reach your cell. The door creaks gently. You step inside. Your blanket waits still warm from the earlier candle flame. You sit carefully, untie your shoes and rub your tired feet. One toe is bruised from earlier courtesy of an ill-placed bucket and Sister Odelia's ambition to clean everything before noon. You smile, because it's just life, even here. You lie back, eyes open, and think about tomorrow. There will be more cheese to flip, more herbs to dry, more dust to defeat, and probably more ink on your sleeve. The Psalter needs mending. The chicken coop gate creaks again, and the bees, oh, the bees need someone brave enough to check the hive without squealing. Maybe you'll volunteer. Maybe you won't. Because oddly enough, this life has space for choice. A life where the big decisions have already been made, faith service, quiet dedication, but where the little ones, the ones that shape the hours, still belong to you. You can sing louder at lewds. You can write a poem in your ledger's margins. You can leave a piece of cheese near the cat's bowl, even if cats technically aren't supposed to be fed scraps. Historians still argue whether convent life was liberating or restrictive. Did women here find freedom through devotion and structure, or were they pressed into a mould too tight for breath? The answer, like most things, is probably yes, and also no, and also depends on the cheese. But you tucked in your cell, with a belly full of honeyed barley, and the moon watching gently from above, know one thing for sure. This life, this quiet rhythm of bells, brine and borrowed books is yours. Entirely yours. The candle flickers. The walls no longer feel like stone, but like soft, slow breath. Outside, the cloister walk is still. The stars are out. The garden herbs curl inward for the night, their fragrance mellowing into something almost musical. Somewhere a moth taps at the shutter, curious or lost or just following the moon like everyone else. You stretch beneath your blanket, not far, just enough. The straw-filled mattress sighs beneath you, but doesn't complain. A small mercy. Chairman Spitz, if he were real, would be curled on your windowsill by now, watching the courtyard like a furry sentry. But he's not here, and that's okay. You're not alone. The day was full of salt and scripture, of hands dipped in cream and words etched in ink, of small jokes whispered in linen halls and prayers folded like laundry. You've done your part. You've walked your laps. You've stirred your vats and bowed at the right moments. You've listened. You've laughed a little. You've remembered things worth remembering. And now you sleep. Let the rhythms continue without you for a while. Let the bells toll softly in the distance. Let the cheese wait. You'll see it in the morning. And tomorrow, as always, there will be tea.